Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Peter Ruskin. I'm the Deputy British Ambassador to Sweden. Welcome to those in the room, to the British residents. Welcome as well to those who are joining us online this afternoon. Today is a busy day in the diplomatic business. European countries are coordinating their response to Russia's decision to recognize as independent the two regions of Luhansk and Donetsk in eastern Ukraine, and the Russian decision to send troops into those regions. And as you would expect, the UK and Sweden are among those countries coordinating a response. And Ambassador Judith Gough has been called into a meeting on that, but hopes to join us a little bit later this afternoon. The purpose of this magnificent building that we're in this afternoon is to bring people together from the UK and from Sweden to discuss the topics that matter most to both countries. And cybersecurity is absolutely one of those topics. Since we published our first national cybersecurity strategy in 2011, and since we established our National Cybersecurity Centre in 2016, we have worked closely with Sweden across lots of different aspects of the topic of cybersecurity, and that includes our particular focus for today of securing or cyber securing indeed, your supply chain. And I think since 2011, and indeed since 2016, the real world risks around cybersecurity have become much clearer. Last summer, I was walking around Södermalm on a Saturday afternoon and kept noticing that the Coop supermarkets were closed as I walked past them, and didn't really understand why this was until I saw the press coverage over the coming days. Volvo Cars has also been affected by a cyber attack, and lots of other examples as well. So the impacts or the risks around cybersecurity are becoming ever clearer. And to return to the business that's focusing our minds very much today, the cyber implications of what's happening in Ukraine are much on our minds. Indeed, I saw that at the press conference that Magdalena Andersson hosted not 2 hours ago, one of the questions that one of the journalists asked her was specifically on the cyber implications of what's happening. So welcome, thank you all very much for coming. And now, seamlessly, I'm going to hand over to Ambassador Michaela Kumlin-Granit, Swedish Ambassador to the United Kingdom. Ambassador, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Peter, and hello everyone from London. Thank you for this excellent introduction. It's always a pleasure to speak alongside my British colleagues, especially colleagues from the British Embassy in Stockholm, with which we work so well with. As you said, this collaboration between the British Embassy in Stockholm and the Swedish Embassy in London, together with the industry, comes at a very pertinent time, especially in this time of age, as you very much elaborated upon, Peter. It's a very special day today, and we follow everything with a very close eye. And of course, the cyber implications are quite large here. So I think that that also makes this seminar quite timely. And as many of you, as you are aware of, Sweden is one of the most well-connected countries in the world, as the UK is. With a majority of the population having access to the internet, and the demand as well. And this is not only in times of crisis, but also in times of normal day life. The demand for cybersecurity solutions is rapidly growing in response to the increased security awareness. And I think we'll see this grow over time. This webinar is one way to highlight these important issues and an opportunity to learn from each other. Both Sweden and the UK are world-leading innovation nations and have by this time shown great leadership in tackling cyber threats. Both our countries already have long-standing traditions of collaboration in the areas of defense security as well. And as we speak, we also have a JEF meeting here in the UK, where also our Nordic Baltic country fellow men are also attending on a defense minister's level. And we have our Swedish Peter Hultqvist there as well. The Swedish government decided last year to create a national cybersecurity center as a central part of Sweden's long-standing desire to improve its capacity to prevent, identify, and deal with increasing cyber threats. We have four main organizations working together to establish the center. And they are the Swedish Armed Forces, the National Defense Radio Establishment, the Swedish National Security Agency, and the Swedish Civil Contingencies Agency. There's also ongoing collaboration in the private sector to comply with new regulations for suppliers of societal services such as energy, transport, bank, health, and other digital services such as internet-based meeting spaces and cloud services. So I really look forward to exploring how we jointly as embassies and industry representatives can further support international collaboration in the areas of security, prevention, and protection of critical infrastructure. Like the UK, the Swedish government recently launched a national data strategy aiming at strengthening our welfare competitiveness and a sustainable society. And this strategy will, among other things, build the foundation for a long-term effort to improve the sharing of data in an open, secure, and controlled manner. Moreover, I was very pleased to participate on behalf of Sweden at the Swedish government at the Future Tech Forum organized by the UK in November last year. And it was a welcome initiative and a great opportunity to discuss and develop a common understanding on how to foster innovation and collaboration between like-minded countries. And I would like to express a special thanks to you and your team, Peter, and also then to Judith when she comes along, for working tirelessly with this webinar in order to put it together in a very difficult time. And I would also like to thank our prominent speakers and audience for shedding light on these very important and current topics. So please enjoy the discussion. I'm looking forward to it myself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Now to introduce our speakers and to lead the discussion, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Dan Pilkington. Dan works out of our embassy in Copenhagen, but across the Nordic region. Dan, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Peter, for the introduction. Thank you, Ambassador, also for your opening remarks. As Peter said, I'm Dan Pilkington. I'm our FCDO, so Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, regional lead for cyber, based in Copenhagen. My work keeps me busy across the region. I'm delighted to be here in Stockholm to lead this discussion. Wanted to say a huge thank you because it's been a real team effort to get us all together online and in person for this event. So thank you so much to the embassy here, to the Swedish Embassy in London, to SOFF and to ADS for making this event happen. It's a real pleasure to be here. I've been working in UK cyber since about 2011, when we wrote our first strategy. I wasn't directly involved in drafting it. So I have been knocking around for a while, but I'm not myself an expert in supply chain security. So I have the very easy job of asking the questions today, and the gentlemen to my right and left have the much more difficult job of answering these really challenging questions. So it's a good opportunity now for me to ask them to introduce themselves. So I think I'll start with Ricard.
Thank
to
you.
my right.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. And actually seeing people in the audience is also a big thing after all those years in the pandemic. My name is Richard Öme, and I'm a senior advisor at Node Cybersecurity and Law. I'm also the chair for the cyber defense group at the Swedish Security and Defense Industry Association. Before that, I've been working in government for almost 29 years at the government office and also at FRA, but also mostly of all at the cybersecurity and critical infrastructure protection at the Swedish Civil Contingencies Agency. So that's a short turn of my career, so to speak. Thank you.
We are provided with a small company, only 30 people, providing infrastructure services for all ISPs in the Nordic region. We do have services in all Scandinavian countries, including Finland, that we're just launching actually, as we speak. I've been working on robustness and availability of services since internet was involved. Since we built internet in Sweden here in around 1986, 87 or such. Been involved in the security portion of robustness and resilience since. Been working at Cisco and a number of other telcos. So we're responsible for time and frequency in Sweden, and that's also where we have some cooperation with partners in the UK.
Fantastic, thank you. Adrian.
Hello, I'm Adrian Nish. I work for BA Systems based in the UK. You probably know us here for land military vehicles, but we have a large cyber and data business as well in the UK, and I manage the cyber portfolio. So I look after strategy, so what we do in cyber, what we sell, as well as R&D and our investments as well. Thank you.
Kerry, I head up the government sector team within the National Cybersecurity Centre within the UK. We provide advice and guidance to the whole of the UK public sector. That's everyone from the Prime Minister all the way down to local authorities, and also the National Health System and a lot of our devolved administrations, so Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, as well as the Crown Dependencies and Overseas Territories. So quite a big space. And yeah, looking forward to speaking to you today.
Fantastic. Thank you, gentlemen. I'm going to propose a sort of a structure for organising our discussion. So I'll just talk you through that before we start, so that mainly to keep me organised in my questions. So firstly, we're going to talk about the nature of the problem, just kind of get settled with what is the nature of a supply chain, nature of supply chain cybersecurity risks, just so that we have a common understanding of the problem. And then we'll talk a little bit about how we can address the problem, and how to increase the cyber resilience of our supply chains. And then lastly, we'll take a little bit of a closer look at UK-Sweden cybersecurity collaboration. What does it look like at the moment, and what can we do to make it stronger generally and in this area in particular? And so we'll start there. And I'm going to ask my first question to Ricard. I'm going to ask, Ricard, can you kind of just talk us through what are supply chains? What does resilience mean in a cyber context for supply chains? And why are we more interested in them right now?
Well, that's a huge question. The first time I really got supply chain on my agenda, so to speak, was in 2011. We were with the Swedish Information Security Council in Taiwan. They had been hit, and they told us a lot about how they was hit about the 2004 earthquake, which cut actually 30 undersea cables for them. At that time, Taiwan was big on trading with some financial instruments, huge industry and huge value of money ongoing, and that was cut off completely directly. And I don't know if it ever came back to them. So that was my really first notice of that. Since then, I mean, it has been developed. We have been seeing sea cable eruption, and more we also see the antagonistic attackers going in and going for the easy part, so to speak, on the supply chain, if they would like to disrupt us. But what is the frame? I was thinking about in front of this summer, and I said that for me, it is disruption to your digital supply chain. The dependence you have on information or IT services from other places outside your IT environment. That, I think, conclude. If you look into different scripts and different sort of reports, you have many different parts of it. But for me, that is the key issue, really, for me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's my second question to Adrian. Adrian, if supply chains risks aren't new, which I think we'd agree they aren't, why are we talking about them now? Why is it a particular moment for us to be focused on supply chain risks in particular?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think there's a few drivers going on at the moment. Some of them are kind of very large, long scale. You know, you're talking decade, generational scale drivers, and some of them are more short term. So some of the long scale stuff, I think, is more the kind of reaction to globalization, for example. So the realization that we're very dependent on China in particular for a lot of what we have both in technology, but also more broadly. Some of the drivers, like I said, are a bit more short term. So some of the cyber attacks that we've seen over recent years have definitely brought this topic to the fore. I can think of ones like the Cloud Hopper campaign, NotPetya, and others that we've seen in recent years. And I think in the even shorter scale, COVID has definitely brought this to the fore as well. And you know, shortages of everything from kind of shipping containers to vaccines have brought supply chain back to kind of the top of the agenda for people. So I think there's multiple drivers, but some of them are kind of long-term things that we need to tackle at that sort of scale, and some of them, you know, we just need to kind of work through over the coming months.
Fantastic, thank you. Patrick, would you agree? Do you think we are driven by a perception of threat in response to recent incidents, or do you see those long-term drivers as being more significant for making supply chain risks being the issue of the day?
I think there are two different parts to the question, just like Rick had brought up. One is that the antagonist is getting smarter, and they're using different and more modern tools. It's interesting that you talk about the fiber in Taiwan. That is actually something I've discussed quite a lot from a security standpoint, because the problem there was the fiber goes between the Philippines and Taiwan, because no one wants to have fiber between Taiwan and China mainland. And that's where the structure is, and that's where the earthquake were. So that's also, from a routing perspective, a very interesting incident. But one issue has to do with IT being used for more traditional supply chain issues, which means that impact on IT might impact also non-IT business continuity questions. The other part has to do with what I heard the first time in 2001, people from MIT talked about firewalls. And he said, first of all, firewalls are obsolete. Like, what? And the second one is that when they had a firewalls in MIT, it protected internet from the students, not the other way around. So where they had a firewalls, it would turn the way around. But the serious part has to do with the antagonist, just like you just heard with the examples of the attacks. That previously, when you were attacking IT, it had to be over the internet, and it had to pass through as ordinary payload protocols. Nowadays, you can see attacks via software distribution, which means that we do not longer have install a software and forget. You can no longer run a software that you just got together with a manual. Whoever runs the software securely must be able to also understand how the software works, to be able to act when there are CVs and other kind of notices being shipped around, which means that suddenly the interest from a security standpoint for buying software as a service has increased much more than self-hosting. And that's a big change on how you are running your software, but that is how you have to do. So you have to run your IT or cyber defense in a completely different way today.
And it's in the sense that that operating environment has changed, and therefore the nature of the risk has changed.
Yeah, there are many people that talk about sort of IT as attack chains in multiple steps. I just talk about 3 steps to make it easy. You have the actual perpetrators coming in and get some kind of foothold. The second step, it moves sideways to wherever you want to do the attack, and then you do the attack, which could be an exfiltration or to encrypt data or whatever it is. Historically, up until 2 years ago, businesses were only looking at the first of these. Nowadays, suddenly, you need to design your network in a way so that if you have a person on the inside, or maybe you have to believe that you do have someone on the inside, regardless of whether you have something connected to the internet or not, you must make sure that your systems are separated, so an attack only destroys or only hampers the system wherever the antagonists do have access.
Fantastic, thank you. And turning to you, Matt, if we're searching for credit for ourselves in recent years, could we perceive an increase in risk in the supply chain as a consequence of good work that we collectively and organizations have done in protecting our direct assets? In other words, our own organization. Are we getting better at defending our own organizations, and therefore our adversaries are turning to our supply chains as an area of vulnerability?
I think, as Patrick just indicated, so moves towards software as a service and move towards cloud is putting us in a place where, especially with government, we're all adopting sort of cloud services as a good way of doing security, because a lot of the security protection side of it and updating of systems, etc., rests with the cloud provider. So rather than relying on IT teams to do that well, you've got the provider doing that. The problem is that the vulnerability around cloud services is often with the access management and the identity management. So you will have third-party providers who are the providers of the Microsoft estate, the O365 estate, or the Google estate, or whatever it might be. Those people will have potentially privileged access to your network, and they might be a third-party supplier to the actual Microsoft company in the first instance. So the actors have realized that if they can't get in through a direct attack on a network easily, where they used to be able to do that with on-premise estates, what they can do is actually compromise the third-party provider, where the cybersecurity might not be as good, and then get in through that method to get onto the network and then do the lateral movement and all the other things that Patrick just explained. So it's more that, yes, we are definitely improving in our ability to find better ways of doing security and manage our data in a much more integrated and coherent way. However, the actor is watching and they're looking at ways that they can compromise that. By and large, the actor has a better understanding of our own supply chain in many cases than we do, because they're constantly looking for that vulnerability to exploit. You ask anyone in government to instantly tell you what their IT supply chain that sits underneath their IT estate looks like, they would be hard-pressed to give you a fulsome answer beyond our primary strategic suppliers. So the importance of actually understanding who your key suppliers are, how they dock into the most important parts of your network, and what risks they pose through their own cybersecurity practices has become ever more important.
Fantastic, thank you, Matt. And staying with you, Matt, we're expecting dialogue interest today in the cyber dimensions of what's happening on the border of Ukraine, as Peter spoke about at the start. To what extent does geopolitical context kind of influence the threat environment globally? And should organizations to what extent should organizations be mindful or be aware of geopolitical context when they're thinking about their own organizational risk?
So I think the phrase that we're using in the UK at the moment is to treat things with an abundance of caution. What this means is you may not be directly targeted as a result of the geopolitical activity, whatever it might be, but as Adrian indicated, and also Richard indicated just before, you can be the victim of an untargeted attack potentially, where obviously with NotPetya being a good example, the actor targets one particular bit of software that exists in a lot of different companies in the specific country they're targeting, but it also exists elsewhere. So if the software is wormable and then it compromises everything else around it, as we saw with WannaCry, you become a victim of it regardless. So I guess the important thing is really to do some really, really basic things, like even before you get to the cybersecurity stuff, nobody's going to be able to do cybersecurity faster in a short time and suddenly improve their stance beyond what it currently is. But they can make sure they've got a disaster recovery plan. They can look at what is the backup for my key services if they go down for any reason. What sort of like fallback have I got for that? Do I have offline backups to actually make sure that if everything does go down, I've got something to fall back on? And then ultimately, if I have to do an incident response, have we got a well-exercised incident response? Who in the organization is going to lead that? Who are the partners that I need to bring into the room when that happens? And who on the board understands what their actual risk is and what their role is in a massive incident response if it needs to occur? This is something that organizations should be doing anyway, all of the time, but it becomes more important in this kind of situation where you think there might be an increased chance that something might happen and therefore you might be an unsuspecting victim of an attack.
Thanks, Matt. That's really great advice. Adrian, I wonder from a company, from an organization perspective, does that ring true to you? Does that feel like something that a company like BAE Systems would do? Seeing those warnings, those encouragements from government, from NCSC.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think every company has a roadmap. They're always trying to improve things, and in the best circumstances, they need to know where they're going, but they're making progress through that. I actually gave a briefing today to some of our colleagues on the current situation, and one phrase that I think resonated was, "Don't let a crisis go to waste." If you've got stuff that that needs to be done, use this as a time to really emphasize, what are the barriers to that? What do you need to get that done, and work through that roadmap?
Fantastic. That's really interesting that you've done that today and bringing Matt's perspective to life. Unless anybody has anything to add on the nature of the problem, the nature of the threat.
Well, I think it's accurate as said here that you really have to learn from what you have learned when you are in a crisis. And I think the method for doing that is really to using the skills to have the organization and really facilitate that kind of after action report, so to speak. It's so easy to go forward also all the time, and especially if you're a small organization, not that many resources to your advantages, that could be really difficult. And then maybe you have to bring in some help also for doing that.
Fantastic, thank you. Patrick, anything to add?
No, I think this is moving forward.
Brilliant.
Good.
We're maintaining structure.
Forward.
And
Yes, excellent.
It's actually just occurred to me that we feel a little bit like a police lineup. You can maybe all decide as we go along which of us is guilty, and then we'll talk about it afterwards. Fantastic. So I mean, this is now really the central substance of our discussion, addressing the problem. We've done a great job of describing the challenge, but now we need to talk about what should organisations do to enhance the cyber resilience of their supply chain. Matt, I'm going to turn to you first, if that's okay. What are governments doing to address their own supply chain risks, and are they setting a good example?
So I would say that we've, in the UK at least, we understand that we've got a problem. I think I sort of described some of that to you just then. And that is that I think the key to supply chain, solving supply chain risk is to have a very good engagement with your suppliers and be sort of, have a regular sort of heartbeat of meetings with your key suppliers to ensure that you understand what their cybersecurity posture looks like, and also that they've got enough of a good relationship with you that they're willing to tell you if they actually have an incident. It becomes problematic when a key supplier has an incident and they sit on it for 2 years and you don't realise it, and your networks are exposed to that. If they have, I guess, a really good privileged access to your network, as we see with some of the key managed service providers, then it's really important, again, to be able to have that conversation with them about what are you going to do to ensure that my system is safe when you're actually administering it, and what can we agree on in that space. The way the UK is moving at the moment is having quite mature conversations with our key suppliers to be able to do that and understand exactly what we're going to get from them and what we can expect from them in a cybersecurity sense. The other thing we're doing is putting in place, I guess, standards and other things to ensure that we know what to expect from a regulatory perspective on those key networks that we really care about. Formerly, with telecommunication security, we took that the requirements that we have there, and now we've upgraded them to ensure that there's a heavy dose of cybersecurity in them, so that we know from a regulatory perspective that those telecommunications providers that we sit on top of for all of our critical national infrastructure are going to be behaving to a certain standard. And then we're now expanding that through our Department of Culture, Media and Sport. They're developing some regulations around doing a similar thing with managed service providers as well, because of that sort of aspect of the supply chain. So there's a bit about mapping it and actually understanding what your key services are that you offer, understanding which suppliers are critical to the provision of those services, and making sure that they're your priority. And the second thing is about actually having a system for understanding what they believe their system of their standard of cybersecurity currently is, and a degree of enforcement where it actually pertains to critical national infrastructure systems and maintaining them. And that's the direction that we're heading with our new government cybersecurity strategy at the moment, and the direction that the national strategy is heading into.
Fantastic, thank you, Matt. And does that feel familiar from a Swedish perspective? A trend towards greater regulation in critical national infrastructure?
Yes, in some sort of way, but I would like to start in other directions, so to speak. I mean, in Sweden we have about 340 government agencies. We have 290 municipalities. We have 21 regions. And are they cyber secure? No, not all of them, at least. Some of them are very good, but most of them do have a challenge. And with that said, just to put the cybersecurity part on the agenda is difficult for a small municipality. If you're talking about supply chain, it's not on the radar at all. And I actually know that because I did a large investigation in 2020 at the Västra Götaland region. And this is an open report which everybody can read, so I'm not disclosing anything which is secret. But if you look into those, the capacity they have or the possibilities they have to actually mitigate this kind of threats, it is not there really. So that is one challenge here to address really. But also, if you would like to move on, and you can move on, and you can also use the different agencies in that. But to be frank, the first really report I see was actually MSB who put out a report just last in November, I think. Swedish Civil Continuous Aid is tasking this kind of challenge. ENISA has also done a good report addressing. But to be frank, this is a new topic for most. It's not really on the agenda. We have to address that, and you have to put the right, and then come into procurement. And you all know that it takes time for procurement to go through, and you have to do this kind of thing on a 3 or 4 year basis, and you have all these kind of problems. So I would say that government can do a lot more. For example, I would have a more strict and firm regulation towards, for example, the municipalities to actually address this kind of issue, not just the cybersecurity supply chain, but there's actually no real demands on that on cybersecurity. And actually, to be frank, I mean, those are the organization or government or agencies who delivering the services to the population. And they have to address this in a completely different way. And this is one of the issues I took up in that report from 2000.
Fantastic. And does that mean that the expertise that resides at the center of government needs to be made available, needs to support those municipalities and local?
Absolutely. I mean, on the top level, but to be frank, one other thing I put out on this report is that you have to work on the regional level also. The regional actors have to work together, as you have probably have to work within the devolved governments or whatever you are in UK. You also have to do the same thing here, because the top node, so the new cybersecurity center and the agencies which is involved, that could do the baseline and the instruction and the legal frameworks to implement that. But then you have to push it out, because they can't be everywhere. So the regional parts have to do their part of it. Otherwise, we're not going to succeed with the overall cybersecurity issue, and especially not there. But if it comes into the suppliers, there are good suppliers here, which actually good companies which actually could help you out and do this kind of thing. And to be frank, how many different systems is there between the different regional boards in Sweden and the different municipalities? Not that many, if you count into it. So you can actually do a comprehensive effort towards that. So I think it's possible, yes, but we are not there at all right now.
Fantastic. Patrick, any other interesting views, any different perspectives?
Well, let me continue on where Richard was about describing Sweden and slightly different, what I see the difference between UK and Sweden. Sweden is extremely distributed, where each entity, not only public sector but also private sector, have not only to take care of their own cybersecurity or whatever they do, they also have to decide themselves whether they're providing anything that is important for the society. It's even a distributed decision making. We don't have any central body in Sweden that says this service is important. And that means that each individual organization is sort of don't really know whether they're doing something that is important. The legislation changed slightly so that if someone is delivering something that they believe is important for Sweden, because no one tells them, if they are using suppliers, wholesale suppliers, then they have to write specific contracts. That's what new legislation says, but it's only from 1st of December last year. Okay. So that's something that can be improved. The second thing that I think is not really optimal is that the European legislation on NIS and other reporting to share experiences. In Sweden, you have to share experiences with agencies. And if you're private sector, you share with agencies that are at the same time either a customer of yours or they are oversight or both. Do you really want to sort of report your weaknesses to these entities? Well, yes, you could, if it was the case that you got more back than what you... This is a sort of also business market economy decision. How much should you share compared to what you get back? So there you have the whip and the carrot, and I think in Sweden we don't serve enough carrots at the moment. so the legislation is there, but it's not really, the wheel is not turning. Okay. So, and the last thing that I think can be improved is, it's also specifically in Sweden, is that if it is the case that the government have, for example, said that certain things, technical things are important, I don't see that in the procurement process, which means that you use legislation to try to force private entities and others to provide certain security issues in your services. For example, IPv6, which is much easier to make secure than IPv4, but no public agency are buying anything with IPv6. So Sweden is far down the line, one of the worst countries in the world, well, number 44 or something, where we should not be on IPv6. And the government asked PTS now for the third time, where is all IPv6 in Sweden? And like, well, it should be there if you actually asked for it. Yeah. So there are certain things that needs to be done. In the UK, on the other side, sitting on the outside, I've been working with Home Office for the Data Retention Directive implementation, for example. It's a little bit more, it's more centralized, it's more coordinated, which also means that also the distribution within the UK sort of society seems to be a little bit easier. But on the other hand, we can really learn from each other a lot, and that's why I'm really happy to be invited. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Fantastic, thank you. And Adrian, do you feel that we are getting a good balance of incentives and support in regulation to private sector organisations from government?
Yeah, I mean, it's never going to be a popular thing to say as a private sector entity that maybe we need more regulation, but there is a fundamental problem in cybersecurity, which is an economics problem. It's the gap in information between the buyers and the sellers, just a market problem, basically. The buyers don't understand what good looks like when they're making purchases. All they've got is the marketing to go on, and they've got the price and they've got the pressure from the bosses to make a decision. So it's very difficult to understand if what you're procuring is actually secure. And this is an area that government can help it. Government can step in. They can, through regulation, mandate what good looks like to give a clear indication to the market. What is snake oil versus what is actually secure by design and approaches that are genuinely worthwhile. So I'm not going to stand here and advocate for more regulation necessarily, but I think it's worth looking at where are those kind of market problems that government should address.
Fantastic, thank you. And you've teed up Matt perfectly, not just in terms of regulation, but in terms of support, advice, and guidance. Could you give us a few examples of the sorts of things that the government offers to organisations in terms of guidance for providing assurance in your supply chain?
Yeah, I think so. We've put out some guidance recently, which sort of identifies specific principles that we expect organisations almost step by step should be going through to assess what their supply chain looks like, firstly, be able to map it out, and then also understand what good cybersecurity looks like in that supply chain and where they've got key dependencies and how they can actually shore that up. I think where the problems have been in the past, we've had a lot of contracts that have gone out there. People have procured stuff, and very much like a new car that you've bought, the car works perfectly well when it's like new, but then as it gets older and older, vulnerabilities appear. The difference between a car and like a network is that no one's actually trying to sabotage your car like every hour of the day, whereas in the cybersecurity world, we get a lot of people trying to attack networks all the time, or even just do reconnaissance to see if they can get access somewhere. And so there have been problems with trying to, I guess, get rid of the legacy IT that's built up in the system, that technological debt, which you kind of rely on it to actually operate all your key systems. And if you don't do something about it very quickly, then you're pretty much a sitting duck to most of the key actors that we worry about there, certainly from a state-sponsored context, but definitely from a cybercrime context. And then in addition to that, the procurement people that are sitting in the chair in terms of actually signing the contracts in the first instance aren't necessarily cybersecurity people themselves, don't really know what they should be asking for in the contract. So what we're moving towards is more sort of pre-designed contract clauses that will ensure that the right standards, or that people are actually asking for the right thing in the first place. Secondly, that they're focusing their attention in the right place and doing proportionate sort of risk assessment of their supply chain in terms of the size of their organisation, what services they're delivering. The third thing, I think, is very much in the space of trying to get people to invest in the sorts of products that Adrian's talking about. such as products that are secure by design and secure by default. There are a lot of people think of IT and they think, oh, it's a phone or it's a computer or it's a, whatever it happens to be, a laptop. But we have lots of CCTV in government departments. They're all connected to the internet. We have X-rays in different sort of buildings which are connected to the internet. We've got a lot of things that we need to worry about that could be potential for attack and for espionage and other things. And so actually setting out principles for how government procures and organisations procure, what they look for, what sort of specific kite marks do they need to see in products before they buy them to know that they're bringing something safe into the organisation, and then that they're actually configuring it in a secure way, and that the supplier, if it's a third-party supplier, is configuring that in the right way for the organisation. And then going back to Richard's point about local government and all that sort of thing, what sort of patterns, what sort of architectures are we promoting to organisations that have to do a lot of this by themselves? Is there stuff that you can give them as a template that will be in general, like quite secure when they actually implement it, that will help them to be secure right from the start, rather than being left to their own devices to connect things that shouldn't be in the right places to other things that shouldn't be there?
Well, I think that solving the problem, if you take a Swedish standpoint from this, I think we have the new Cybersecurity Act rolling out. I was in that investigation in Sweden, partaking in that, and I think from our point of view, from Swedish security and defense companies, we are we would like to have baselines. We would like the government to point out this is the baselines for what we should do. And you have that, it's so lot easier to deliver to the government and to the municipalities and counties, because we miss that right now. And because, as Patrick said, I mean, you could go to one county and have one regulation and one sort of what they would like to have, and then you go to another which have a completely different one. So that is quite frustrating. So to have that type of baseline. And then also I think that the new National Cybersecurity Center could work very closely with, for example, the procurement agency to take a best practice there and say, this is what you should use. So you have an overall, and then all the different agencies and other actors could use that to procure more resilient solutions to meet the cybersecurity supply chain risks.
And so you would see the new Swedish Cybersecurity Centre as being the organisation to drive forward that
yes,
agenda?
Because they are the top level of this, and that they could do, and then the rest of society could use that kind of product. But they have to do together with the procurement agency.
I think I must jump in. I think those two things that Richard brought up is good in theory, but in practice, I don't really think it will work that well.
I'll oppose you there.
Let's hope, for example, the cybersecurity center in Sweden is a collaboration between various entities, as we just heard. And I think that is excellent. I think these agencies should work together, because it is hard for an organization today when you have an issue to know which one of the agencies you should talk to. So having one point of contact will make things easier. The amount of resources and things in the center, I think it will take some time before we are there that they actually can act as the cybersecurity center. And I think, unfortunately, too many people in Sweden are today maybe underestimating the power and the effect of going to one of them in the meantime while they're cooperating. The other thing regarding, the other thing is a typical Swedish thing about the Cybersecurity Act regarding the baseline. When we agree that we should have a baseline, suddenly all of us in Sweden talk about how to implement that baseline, not what's in it. So what Richard, what you said, which is the important part, which we'll get in Sweden, is to define what's in the baseline, not what the logotype should look like. That's what we're talking about. We ignore what's actually in the box.
You have to have a dynamic framework for this. It's not a baseline like that. You have to have a dynamic part of it. Otherwise, it's not going to function.
Understood, like a framework as opposed to an absolute baseline standard. Understood. Just circling back slightly to some of the guidance and advice that Matt talked through. We were having a conversation before we started about realism and whether government's advice, guidance, support, etc., is realistic. I think it's a really commendable feature of NCSC's offer that the blogs that support the guidance often talk about the question of, is the advice, guidance, expectations that we're setting out realistic for organizations? Could you talk a little bit, Matt, about the thinking process that goes into basically asking the question, are we asking private sector organizations to do things that are realistic, and how that supports the guidance being effective?
Yeah, I think the really key thing about the National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK is that we are absolutely joined at the hip with industry. And so before we actually put advice and guidance out like that, we actually talk to industry about it to make sure that it's a realistic sort of ask of the user out there, and whether it's going to be actually implementable for them from a practical point of view, but also a financial point of view. So one of the things that happened during the COVID pandemic, for example, was, I'm sure it happened here in Sweden, government departments suddenly had to work from home. And not every government department had their own laptop deployments or other things for people to work with. So they had a lot of people at home needing to access IT systems, government IT systems, but using their own devices. So we needed to develop some bring your own device policy and guidance that we could push out to government departments. Did we just sit there and write it off the top of our heads and hand it out to government departments and say, here's what you're doing? Absolutely not. We knew that government departments sit on Microsoft estates, Google estates. We went to Microsoft and Google and we sat down with them and said, what is realistic in this space? How do we actually write this guidance so that people can use it? And then how do they configure it in the most secure way that they can manage it so that it doesn't become an incredible risk from like malware on people's laptops going up into a government system? And that's exactly what they did. And so we published the blog, but actually Microsoft and Google wrote most of the guidance because they were the experts on what they were doing. We knew that was realistic from the user perspective. And we apply that wherever we actually write advice and guidance in general.
Thank you, Matt. That's a really good example. Just circling back to Patrick's point about trust in an ecosystem, I wonder, Adrian, whether your perspective on the UK ecosystem and the development of the UK ecosystem and the extent to which we've managed to build a trust environment that supports that whole of society approach that our new national strategy aims to foster.
Yeah, I mean, there were iterations of agencies before the National Cybersecurity Centre that had levels of collaboration with the private sector. So there was something to build on there, and I think there's a direction of travel probably over actually the three successive strategies from 2011, 2016, and the latest one, which is essentially the more closed parts of UK government opening up to CNI, but then the broader private sector, and now to include the citizen as well, and actually have an offering there via the NCSC website on how citizens should protect themselves in cyberspace as well. So I think it's been a phased approach of sort of going out to the communities that government knew well, and then building on that to something that is much more kind of whole of society. But it's for the next few years to see how that plays out, I guess.
Understood. And then turning back to Team Sweden, it's a similar question, I guess, about the potential of the new cybersecurity centre in Sweden. Is that a driver for the development of stronger trust partnerships within the Swedish ecosystem?
Oh, absolutely. Let me start then. So
You can start. Absolutely right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the only thing is that is as I said, we're not there yet, and they have not got enough resources. They're still looking for like what building they're going to be in. It's not staffed enough to be able to what to do. It's slight confusion there, and the various agencies have not really got their own instructions rewritten. What they're going. So it will take a while, but it's definitely the correct direction. And I also personally think it was correct to not directly copy, for example, what's in the UK or France or Australia, just because we have, as Richard so well explained, a different system with much more distributed, where one agency cannot tell another one what to do. You need to use different kind of tools. So, for example, it's excellent to hear that you came out with those kind of sort of talk to Microsoft and Google and whoever you talk to come up with instructions. But how to implement it would be completely different in Sweden just because of this distributed nature. So I think it's good that we're moving slowly. So don't misinterpret me that I think it's a bad thing. We're just not there yet.
Well,
Maybe I should go on this side.
I think, okay, we have to move ahead. We have a tendency in Sweden to investigate and to do a lot of in-depth investigations about everything and not that much action. I really am happy about this cybersecurity center and that we're working together. We have from the Swedish Defense Association came out and said, here is our hand. We really would like to work with you, and we have a discussion hopefully in this year where we will discuss with you and other actors together how could actually industry work together with the National Cybersecurity Center, because I think what you said, Matt, is really key to it, because we have so many skills on the industry side which we can actually utilize and help out with it, but we have to find a framework, and that's the key issue, because there's being from the government side from 29.5 years, I kind of know what it is to procure and the difficulties which is there, and there's this barrier between the government and industry, not everywhere, but too often it is there, and we have to find this kind of a handshake between industry and the government, because otherwise we can't help out. And I think we are moving in that direction a little bit too slow, if I have to say it. I really would like to have it a little bit faster and really go ahead. And as I said, I really is happy about the new cybersecurity center. I think we could come in, begin to discuss right now actually what to do. And there are preliminary discussions on that level, which is good.
Yeah, which is fantastic, and I would definitely say from a UK perspective, as somebody who's been in our system for a while, that it is, our systems didn't arrive overnight. They didn't suddenly materialize. They're the product of patient development of relationships and structures, and finding out some things that work and some things that have not worked so well.
But for example,
time.
I mean, if you look at action, I mean, government together with industry could go out and make some sort of campaign or something like that, and out to different areas, to different commerce boards and whatever, and you say, here we stand together. This is like, and we did this kind of tryout with the Protective Security Act together with the Swedish Security Service, which was very successful. Why not do the same here? I mean, there are things you actually can do without changing regulations also, just to enhance the awareness out there that you have to deal with this.
Absolutely. And then just a slightly different question, to what extent, for companies operating on a global scale, with global supply chains, to what extent are private sector organizations looking for consistency in government advice, guidance, regulation, in supply chain risk management? To what extent is that consistency point really important?
I think we unfortunately have today an unfortunate difference in legislation in our various legislations within countries and territories which actually on a high level do have the same view. We know that specifically in these days, we know that there are countries which are completely different from ours. And I think it's extremely sad that we have, even though we have similar norms and even the same norms, we implement them different enough in our legislation. So for example, moving to data and buying and selling services is hard. So that has led to a situation where complying to law is different from complying to whatever security needs that you see when you do a proper RSA. And that is confusing, and it's also hard, even like a small company. Today, an IT company is not very large. We have services in Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. We are 30 people now. We have 3 different kinds of services: transport, DNS, and time and frequency. And it's really, really difficult. And that is something that, from a security standpoint, of course, we do the same kind of thing in each country. But to comply with the law is something completely different. And that's also an area where we would like to see some more help, to have sort of on more harmonization on the legal side. And that's also why organizations help, where organizations which are cross-boundary can help us entities to interpret the situations.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm going to move on to partnerships, to Sweden, UK cybersecurity partnerships. I'm going to stay with Team Sweden to ask, how do we feel about not just government to government partnerships, but how do we feel about collaboration between the UK and Sweden on cybersecurity and in this area.
There is really a lot of cooperation ongoing. I mean, we are two organizations behind this from the UK side and our Defence Association, which of course is token of that we are actually cooperating. And I think the rather larger companies are there already, of course, especially in the defense domain. There is a good cooperation ongoing and new prosperity which comes out. I really don't see it. In some extent, I see it at the small companies, the more niche companies. And I really don't know how to enhance that, but I think this is one of the ways. And how do you find actually the good cooperation between them? There is good cooperation, and UK and Sweden has a long-standing cooperation together. Where we actually, from the government side, when we've been working in the European government search, we working together in IWN and a lot of different others for us, and to broaden that and to bring on the industry, and that's the new challenge. That's the next step. Could we do that together also? That would be interesting to see, but I don't have a fast fix for that, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then you have Brexit also.
Yeah. No, I think. Yeah. Yeah. No. I don't see Brexit as a specific thing, because you had difference in law and legislation and norms also, for example, within the EU. Just look at Southern and Northern Europe that of course we're discussing, where UK and Sweden was like one team and the other countries another one. But anyways, I'm not so nervous being a small company like that. We are collaborating with our peers in the UK. We actually have UK equivalent of us visiting us on Thursday to have these kind of meetings to exchange information on how to do that. I'm actually more nervous, just like I am in Sweden, for cybersecurity on the non-IT companies, because that's where the supply chain risks really reside, where whoever is responsible for business continuity think that IT is something the IT department takes care of. Now, with cyber, which I said at the beginning, supply chain risk for IT actually. It's that disconnection between cybersecurity issues and business continuity, and that is something where I think we here, all of us, have to explain to the various companies and organizations in our countries, and there we can do much better.
Are we Team GB?
I think we are, yeah.
I think it's the first and only time Matt and I will be Team GB, so we'll take advantage of it. Right. Yeah. So I mean, I'll make a plug for the international companies here. BA Systems has over 1,000 employees in Sweden. So we have an opportunity, I think, internally within the company, as do any other multinational companies, to see what works well for us in one country and to see that that's being shared across with our colleagues in other countries, and then to do that globally as much as we can. So I think there's definitely opportunities there. Also, the telecom security bill will be a lot of Huawei kit getting removed from networks around the UK, and opportunity for Ericsson there clearly. So there's obviously some stuff going on as well, which will open up opportunities, I think, for Swedish exports. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would say that we have very strong cooperation across government with all the relevant cyber institutions here in Sweden. MSB is one example, and we have regular meetings to discuss all of this. We exchange our guidance and our blogs, anything new that we invent, we present that to our partners, and then they can take those ideas and deploy them in whatever manner they mean. So the new Swedish National Cybersecurity Centre, for example, would be a great docking point for that. I remember being at one IWWN conference a number of years ago where we had a very new prioritization matrix for incident management in the NCSC, and we went, here's what we're doing in the NCSC. Then every organization that was actually at that meeting, suddenly there was an exact or very similar thing going on in their home organizations. And that, I think we're not afraid of sharing our good ideas and giving them to our partners to use. And also, we're not afraid of stealing good ideas from our partners. And I'm sure that Sweden will come up with plenty of them.
We're drawing towards the end of our discussion. And I said to them before we started, we'll do our best to answer the question, how should organizations cyber supply chains? Do you want to offer one last opportunity to offer thoughts on that answer? And if we have time, maybe ask ask a couple of questions from the audience, if that's all right. Oh, sorry, is my mic? Sorry. Any last thoughts before the audience in the room?
We have to find tangible way ahead soon, because the problem is here and now. We can't have more as Ambassador was saying here, that of this coup or other stuff. We have to really do something now which is tangible and which is useful. I think that has to be the priority of both government and industry.
Questions from the audience? Anyone poised? My one isn't. Okay.
Thank you. Does it work? Do you hear me? Thanks. So my name is John Drell. I'm a senior analyst at the MSP and an author of the report Richard mentioned, so thanks a lot. I was thinking, you talked earlier, I think it was you, on the lines of where the market sort of tends to fail and issues relating to that. So one of the things we looked at, we wrote our report, theoretically to these into other organizations. The more of a market dominance they have, the more target they will be for potential attackers. Obviously, will value access to more organizations. Now, from a societal perspective, diversity. Navigation. Reasoning along those lines as well, and what kind of conclusions have you reached?
I'll let you go first.
All right.
I would like to say something. I would like to say something on this.
A lot of diversity within the UK market through new startups within the UK, as well as inviting others. I think we do have to be slightly careful around some of the high-risk vendors and managing contracts around them. But yeah, we do welcome that kind of diversity in the market. The problem is that obviously with some providers, they're so big and they supply so much that there's virtually no way of avoiding them. So you kind of have to invest in those providers and hope that the cybersecurity is going to be good, because they do it on a global level and they're a mature cyber organisation. It's the smaller ones that you do need to worry about a little bit. Where, for example, if you've got, let's talk about video conferencing. You know that if you use Microsoft Teams, it's going to have layers of IT security, cybersecurity, sitting behind it, threat teams looking at people trying to mask the platform, really quick moves and vulnerabilities. You get a totally new video conferencing provider that's all the Skypes and the Zooms and that, and they just start flipping out. Do you take that provider? Because they're going to be less targeted by actors. But if the actor's doing reconnaissance right across the network, they don't care what they land on, looking at your organisation in particular, and they see a vulnerable system that's got something that's not patched, hasn't been patched, or the software development cycle hasn't been well developed, they'll go after that. So definitely yes, in terms of trying to focus on diversity within the system and try and increase that, we have to try and put standards in place to ensure that whatever comes up through that ecosystem is also secure and has the right things in place to trust it.
So if you look at it from a pure market economy standpoint, you will see that for each thing that you manufacture, it could be a glass, it could be sort of a headlight of a car or whatever, you see consolidation. So within a market, you will not have more than sort of 5 players which are dominating. So what is happening, we looked at that at the Royal Academy of Engineering Sciences, where we saw that instead of having multiple players that each one of them do everything, we instead see various layers in what we call a lasagna, where you have different players that actually buy wholesale from other players. This is a different kind of sort of buying scheme than what you have seen earlier. And what you have to do is that you have to use diversity. And the important thing then, when you buy something, you can buy from multiple players, or you can buy multiple instances from one player, but you have to ensure that they are really independent from each other. Because if you look at it from a pure mathematical statistical standpoint, it's much more effective to buy 3 insecure systems than having one that you try to make really, really secure, as long as the 3 of them are as independent as possible. is just pure math. So you have to do this sort of these calculations differently nowadays. And you will see blog posts in a couple of weeks that would actually explain this, how you build a reliable system with unreliable components. But it's a new way of looking at things. So you're right on the spot there.
Any other questions? No more questions. We've answered your questions. We've answered the challenge perfectly of how to improve the cyber resilience of your supply chains. I'm really glad to have 100% achieved that objective. Last call for any final comments? No? In that case, just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much to the panel. Thank you so much to the embassy residents for hosting us today. Thank you for everybody following online. I hope you could follow us easily. Yeah, we'll go and have some afternoon tea here now. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you.